final speaker is Q Anthony Omene. Q is an award-nominated writer whose columns appear in Maclean's and the Globe and Mail. He's the host of the Unredacted podcast with Glenn Greenwald. In addition, he is a board member of the Canadian Association of Black Journalists. Q, take it away.
All right, first of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I'm not going to take too long with the preamble. Just want to focus on one particular aspect of this because many of the others have been covered. And that is what I think is a rather abysmal response from the left, both in regards to what the Convoy protest was about in the first place, and the laws and regulations leading up to it. So last year in the Globe and Mail, I wrote a column with a good friend of mine, a medical doctor from around the DMV area, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, that runs a medical clinic and also does plenty of community work in his spare time. And when we were having conversations about the possibility of vaccine passports and vaccine mandates, due to what he was seeing in his clinic, he thought that passports would be the worst thing possible. Not because passports, or at least the idea behind them, didn't have some validity, but because in practice, implementing vaccine passports would make the lives of marginalized people even more difficult. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as the vaccine passports were implemented, it increased hesitancy among his patients. It made life more difficult for them in terms of being able to go about their daily lives, getting to the jobs and so on. And then once the mandates were implemented, people who were working in public sector jobs, although not very high paying public sector jobs, and even people who were working in private industry that had the echo effect of the vaccine mandates in that they were requiring their employees to be vaccinated, rather than taking an approach that added the ability for people to, for example, pay for daycare for children who are staying home from school, rather than the ability to increase disability payments, etc. The approach that the United States government and subsequently the Canadian government took was to pressure everyone to get the vaccine, but then implement no other measures to make their lives around getting the vaccine, as well as dealing with the fallout from COVID a little bit easier. Now, the issue with that is that we now have in Canada roughly an 85% uptake on the vaccine. So roughly 85% of the eligible Canadian population has been vaccinated. There is no situation, there's no public health situation or any public policy situation at all, ever, where you're going to get 100% of the population to do anything. So then the question is, how do you account for the other 15% that should have been baked into your assumptions in the first place? Well, in Canada, what we've done is offer nothing in the way of increased disability payments. So people with disabilities that were not eligible for CERB in the first place have gotten a grand total since COVID began of $600. People in remote communities, people in indigenous communities, people in rural communities, and so on, have multiple difficulties getting access to the vaccine. I happen to live in a suburb just outside of Toronto, Ontario. I had to wait several weeks for my booster shot. It's incredibly easy for me to get the booster shot. There are people that I've had to send to various websites that are not run by any government entity, that are not run by the government of Ontario or the government of Canada, in order to find where is the closest location to even get the vaccine. The rollout has been, although people have on their own volition been able to get access to the vaccine, our governments have not made this process any easier, especially where it comes to the lockdowns, the semi-lockdowns, the mandates, etc. It has led to increased resentment and frustration among a particular class of people, generally the working class, who have increased, at least to me and to the polls, increased hesitancy due to the inconsistency of these mandates, these lockdowns, etc. Here comes the Freedom Convoy that are addressing the concerns of people that are wondering why their government is not marshaling them through this period as they promised they were going to do back in 2020, when we were told we're all in this together. When frontline healthcare workers were valued as like the people that are the bravest, the people that are walking us through this healthcare fiasco, the people that are getting us through all this are the healthcare workers, the grocery store clerks, the retail clerks, etc., the people working at pharmacies, all the people that have to get up and go to work in order to make sure that our society still functions, the people that are working at the farms, the people that are working in the warehouses, all of these people that actually have to go to their jobs rather than sitting at home and working from their laptops, were subsequently abandoned over the course of COVID. So once CERB ran out and once the lockdowns ended, all of a sudden, the very same people that we were championing were quietly thrown back into the discard pile of the working class. Suddenly, the wages for Loblaws workers, the question of as to whether they get their measly $2 an hour hazard pay, that quietly begins to disappear. The question as to whether we're going to provide for teachers and make sure that they're made as safe as possible, well, now we're forcing them to go into schools among children that are simple walking disease vectors. Well, when they have issues with whether they're going to have in-school classes or not, whether they're going to have increased capacity for, say, ventilation, whether they're going to be made to wear masks themselves, children are going to be made to wear masks, whether the increased capacity for, the increased ability for students to sit in a class for several hours out of the day, whether the schools are going to have, say, their ventilation improved. None of that actually happens. None of the schools are retrofitted. None of them are upgraded, even though they've been sitting closed and quiet for months at a time. The vaccine, the trucker convoy seizes on all of these issues, and through their primary message is one of vaccine hesitancy, not necessarily anti-vax, but vaccine hesitancy. The second is anti-mandate. The third is anti-passport. As my friend and I wrote in our column, vaccine passports are a tremendous measure that is practically unprecedented in Canadian history, that our ability to move about freely is restricted based on healthcare status. Where it comes to vaccine mandates, the fact that unions are at the same time lionized and then demonized for members that have lost their jobs because they have not been vaccinated. So the Amalgamated Transit Union, for example, saw that bus transit workers were fired from their jobs for not having been vaccinated, and then are demonized because they went to bat to try and get these employees their jobs back. Those very same employees, when they lose their jobs, are made ineligible for employment insurance. So the choice that the government has presented to workers is that you either vaccinate yourself or you starve. It's one or the other. Pick one. That has been the solution to get the remaining 15% to get on the ball. What happens where it comes to, say, the ostensible left in Canada, and I'm including progressives, the NDP, left liberals, etc. The answer is, well, you should just go ahead and get the vaccine and everything's going to be better. This is your fault. If it wasn't for you remaining 15% of people, this would all be over already. Not directing any of your ire towards the government that refused to change its approach to public healthcare policy, social welfare, etc., to make sure that we can all get through this together, as they promised us at the very beginning of this fiasco. No, downloading all of that responsibility to get us through a public health crisis onto the individual worker. The Freedom Convoy seizes on those things. The left liberals and the progressive left, unfortunately, do not. They've gone along with the approach that pretty much whatever comes out of the mouthpieces of government is exactly what we're going to be repeating to each other, thus leading to infighting. And there's absolutely no way that any individual is able to plug the holes of a massive public policy gap. So what happens when we what happens with regards to the Freedom Convoy? Well, while this convoy is happening and while these very valid issues are being addressed, what are progressive people on the left talking about? They're talking about Joe Rogan. They're talking about the fact that Joe Rogan promotes ivermectin, that he promotes vaccine hesitancy, that he promotes vaccine misinformation, that he brings anti-vaxxers on the platform, that he's been irresponsible, so on and so on. Now, the problem is there's always a final boss of authoritarianism. There's always a final boss of the right wing. There's always a final boss of the conservative politics that prevent us from having an equal and just and equitable society. So we're always moving from target to target to target, being distracted by these cultural war issues, while at the very same time, the very people who we claim to oppose, the very people that have the easiest time co-opting both the aesthetics and co-opting the ideology of the working class, or at least in from aesthetic perspectives, co-opting the ideology of the working class, we're doing nothing to oppose that whatsoever, and we're being distracted by these minute cultural issues that are going to change on a dime. There's always going to be another person that we have to oppose. You know, before Joe Rogan, it was Alex Jones. Before Alex Jones, it was Glenn Beck. Before Glenn Beck, it was Rush Limbaugh. Before Rush Limbaugh, it was Ann Coulter. It's always a different target. So from my point of view, the issue with regards to the Freedom Convoy, and on top of that, the invoking of the Emergency Measures Act, has been a failure on the part of the progressive left to seize on the issues that are actually important, to actually talk about the material circumstances of the working class, and to be sucked into the whirlpool of continuously shifting and changing cultural issues, while at the same time ignoring and vilifying the very same people that express their reservations about the conditions that we're put in, and saying that that is not important. What is most important is that we delve into these cultural issues, because once the cultural issues are solved, everything else will be solved. Meanwhile, the federal government passes a law that, passes a measure that allows the RCMP and banks to coordinate, that if somebody is making a contribution to an organization that by the RCMP's lights is designated as a group that promotes insurrection or terror or social disorder, that person's bank accounts can be frozen. That at the very same time, we've been told that these are temporary measures for only 7 days. There are permanent measures that are enacted. For example, any sort of fundraiser, such as GoFundMe or any sort of crowdfunder, must register with FinTrack. That Bitcoin wallet companies, or rather cryptocurrency wallet companies, must also register with FinTrack, thus defeating the entire point of cryptocurrency wallet companies. Because if you want to be able to move money without the ability of federal oversight, or that your transactions are going to be spied upon, well, that's completely been blown out of the water. That's now a permanent measure. People seem to be okay with it. So just to wrap everything up, my issue here, and my point in discussing on this panel, is to talk about the fact that where it comes to dealing with the things that are actually material to the circumstances of our day-to-day lives, I have a really big problem with the fact that we've been dragged into managing cultural issues and managing how people feel about cultural issues, and getting away from actual material issues that will not only affect you throughout this COVID pandemic, but once this issue has either been solved or forgotten about, we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our lives. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.